Hey guys, tonight we're peeling back the bandages on something so raw, so cold, and so shockingly unsterile that even your childhood dentist appointment seems like a spa day. Yes, we're diving headlong into the gruesome reality of Victorian surgery, an era when anesthesia was just a rumor. Antiseptics were for the weak, and your odds of survival mostly depended on how fast the surgeon could saw through your leg before tea time. So before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's set the mood. Dim those lights, switch on a fan for some gentle white noise, grab your comfiest blanket, and maybe tuck your limbs safely under the covers. But let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what surgery felt like before anesthesia? Did they really use saws from the hardware store? Did surgeons honestly wear their own street clothes while digging around in your insides? Was the surgical waiting room just a pub with better lighting? Could you survive having your leg cut off in 7 minutes? Or would you faint before the doctor did? Would you trust a surgeon with a handlebar mustache and blood-stained cuffs? Or would you just take your chances with the local apothecary and a prayer? Well, congratulations, you've just woken up in Victorian England. It's 1847. You've got a splitting headache, a suspicious lump somewhere under your waistcoat, and a nagging feeling that your doctor may have just finished butchering a pig before your appointment. Welcome to surgery, the old-fashioned way. It's morning in 1847, and you've just opened your eyes on a straw mattress, the smell of carbolic acid not yet invented, and the person in the next cot loudly threatening to die first. The nurse offers you weak tea, a slice of stale bread, and a choice. Keep your infected leg, or try your luck with the surgeon's knife. It's a hard decision, especially when the rats seem to have the best immune system in the room. Let's take a moment to get your bearings. The walls around you are a mottled shade of yellow-grey, which could be old paint, mildew, or just the collective effort of several generations of despair. Your bed isn't really a bed at all. It's a sagging pile of straw covered by what used to be a blanket and now is simply a textile experiment in growing new species of fungus. Someone has thoughtfully left you a chamber pot and a cracked basin of water. The water is cloudy enough that you briefly consider whether washing or just remaining crusty is the safer health choice. Next to you, a chorus of coughs, groans, and the occasional very unhelpful medical opinion fills the air. Privacy? Not invented yet. Your every move is public entertainment. If you sneeze, you get 5 bless yous and 1 suggestion to try leeches. Welcome to communal healing, Victorian style. You scan the room. The nurses are a mismatched troupe of sturdy women in aprons, so stained they've taken on the texture of weathered leather. One is dabbing at a wound with what looks suspiciously like yesterday's tea towel, while another is negotiating with a patient over whether or not he's faking his fever. In Victorian hospitals, a good nurse can tell if you're dying or just lazy based on how convincingly you groan before breakfast. Meanwhile, somewhere in the shadows, the hospital cat surveys its kingdom with the cold detachment of an apex predator. Rats scatter as it passes, rats that, let's be honest, probably have better odds of surviving this place than half the patients. There's a certain comfort in knowing that at least someone is thriving. The air is thick, heavy with the scent of sweat, rot, and hope that today will not be the day you end up in the anatomy classroom. Through a cracked window, you hear the distant clatter of carriage wheels and the muffled shouts of London's never-ending street life. Outside, it's all bustle and soot. Inside, time moves slower than a Victorian bowel movement. Breakfast arrives on a wooden tray, if you're lucky. The bread is so stale it might double as a weapon, and the tea is more suggestion than substance, a pale, lukewarm liquid that tastes faintly of sadness and boiled socks. But you chew, you sip, you participate in the universal ritual of pretending it's fine, because the alternative is getting on the wrong side of matron. who has the authority to summon the surgeon just to check in. Let's talk about the beds. Every inch of the ward is filled with cots, each pressed so close that your neighbor's dreams are practically communal property. Someone is always snoring. Someone else is always praying. Someone, for reasons no one can quite figure out, is trying to sell you a miracle tonic made from gin, and something that definitely isn't gin. As you lie there, contemplating your fate, you overhear whispered debates about which surgeon is fastest, which one most likely to wash his hands, and who last saw the infamous Sawbones Jenkins use a saw that still had pork fat on it. There's even a betting pool on who will be next to make the unfortunate transition from patient to cautionary tale. Despite the gloom, there's camaraderie, a kind of gallows humor that makes the misery bearable. You swap stories with the other patients, speculate about the new painless surgery rumor from America, and try not to look at your leg for too long in case it winks back. So you lie in the flickering morning light, uncertain, unwashed, and deeply grateful that, for now, you're awake and only slightly more miserable than yesterday. In Victorian hospitals, that's what passes for a good day. Your doctor enters, twirling a mustache that's seen more blood than a butcher's apron. He introduces himself as both surgeon and barber, two jobs that for some reason require exactly the same set of tools. His handshake is confident, his apron is crusty, and you're beginning to wish you'd just tried homeopathy. He pauses at your bedside with the swagger of a man who's just successfully removed a splinter from his own thumb and now feels fully qualified to tackle your gangrenous leg. His eyes twinkle, either with experience or possibly from the laudanum he's been sampling for the nerves. In one pocket, he has a razor for trimming beards. In the other, a bone saw for trimming, well, bones. The distinction is academic. Both will leave you with fewer parts than you started with. This is the golden age of the barber surgeon, a figure as likely to offer you a haircut as to offer you a lobotomy. For a few shillings extra, you can also get a shave, some bloodletting, or a hot towel, which is handy for dabbing at arterial spray. You find yourself wondering which procedure he's better at, but you're too polite to ask. Let's talk about his appearance. Victorian surgeons took pride in a certain rugged, lived-in look. His coat is a patchwork of bloodstains, each one possibly a former patient or maybe just Tuesday's lunch. He smells faintly of whiskey, hair tonic, and a third thing you're pretty sure is despair. There's a large ring of keys dangling from his belt, each one for a different cabinet, none of which, unfortunately, contain anything you'd recognize as anesthesia. As he talks, he refers to his previous operations with the enthusiasm of a man recapping a particularly good cricket match. We had a marvelous case last week, tibia clean through, managed it in 3.5 minutes. Barely any screaming. He beams at you, clearly expecting applause. If you're lucky, he's part of the new breed who believe in speed surgery. Less time on the table, less chance to bleed out, more chance your ghost won't haunt him. If you're unlucky, he's the methodical sort, the kind who likes to take his time explaining the procedure, demonstrating every tool and pausing for audience questions while you stare at the ceiling and consider your life choices. And yes, there's an audience. Victorian surgery is a spectator sport, and your surgeon is the star. He's here to perform, both in the medical sense and the let's see if we can beat last week's record sense. Medical students crowd around, clutching notebooks and eyeing your infected limb with the hungry anticipation of people who haven't yet learned to fear the phrase "hold him down." You notice his hands. Steady, yes, but not exactly clean. The word sterilization hasn't quite entered his vocabulary. He wipes his fingers on his apron, because why let all that experience go to waste? then checks his pocket watch, sighs contentedly, and announces it's a lovely day for a surgery. His assistant stands nearby, sharpening tools on a leather strop and offering a cheerful reminder that you should try not to move. The patient before you is being wheeled out, still woozy, while the surgeon assures everyone it went remarkably well, lost less blood than last time. There's an odd intimacy to the moment. This man, who could, in theory, give you a trim and a tourniquet in one sitting, now holds your fate in his ink-stained hands. You wonder if you should trust him with your secrets, your sideburns, or your spleen. Maybe all three. As the surgeon cheerfully lays out his tools, humming a jaunty tune, you realize your main comfort is that at least he seems excited to get started. Confidence, after all, is half the battle. The other half is avoiding infection, shock, and the urge to bolt for the door. So you smile weakly, grip the edge of your straw mattress, and prepare yourself for whatever comes next, hoping deep down that your surgeon is better with a scalpel than he is with a straight razor. In Victorian medicine, it's all about taking risks and hoping the barber half of your surgeon is off duty for the day. On a tray beside you, the surgeon lays out his tools: rusty saws, bone forceps, and something that looks suspiciously like a woodworking chisel. Sterilization? Never heard of her. Everything glints menacingly in the candlelight, promising either salvation or an extremely quick death. Let's take a closer look, shall we? The surgical tray is just a warped wooden board, covered in a linen cloth that was white several epidemics ago. The instruments rattle together, freshly wiped on the surgeon's apron, which, as you've noticed, doubles as both hand towel and badge of honor. He arranges each tool with the care of a proud chef plating the world's least appetizing charcuterie board. First, there's the saw. It's the undisputed king of Victorian operating rooms, and it's not subtle about it. A hefty iron blade, stained with the ghosts of patients past, complete with a wooden handle that looks borrowed from someone's gardening shed. It's the kind of saw that says, "I used to cut firewood, but now I do limbs." Progress. The surgeon gives it a test swing, not for your reassurance, but purely for showmanship. If you weren't already sweating, now's the time. Next to the saw, there's a collection of forceps. Some are straight, some are curved, and all look like they could double as medieval torture devices, or, if things get desperate, salad tongs at the hospital's next charity dinner. The forceps are used for gripping slippery things, arteries, veins, the occasional marble someone accidentally swallowed. They're not sharpened, but they are cold, which is really all you need to know. Now let's meet the chisels. These are multi-purpose tools, useful for everything from chipping away infected bone to prying open that stubborn tin of sardines someone sent as a get-well-soon gift. The chisel is, in fact, a repurposed carpenter's tool, proving once and for all that Victorian surgery is just advanced home improvement. Only you're the project. There's also the ever-popular tenaculum, a wicked-looking hook used to grab and hold tissue with a gusto that suggests a deep grudge against anything soft or living. The tenaculum is the surgeon's answer to the age-old question, how can we make this more horrifying? Somewhere on the tray is a mallet. Yes, a mallet. Not for hitting nails, but for gently, by Victorian standards, tapping the chisel through bone, or, if things go south, rapping on the table to get everyone's attention. There's nothing quite like the anticipation of watching someone choose between precision or brute force, depending on how many students are watching. Needles and sutures come next. The needles are thick enough to double as knitting supplies, and the sutures are catgut, literally, sheep or goat intestines dried and twisted into string. It's nature's way of saying, "Congratulations, you survived amputation, And now your wound smells faintly of livestock. The scalpels, meanwhile, are almost delicate in comparison. They're sharp, well, sharpish, and perfect for the surgeon who likes to pretend this is a refined operation and not a race against blood loss. The handles are bone, the blades are steel, and together they create small incisions and big regrets. Don't forget the artery clamps. Spring-loaded and clunky, these are supposed to stop your life from leaking out all over the floor. They look like angry metal crabs and work about as reliably. None of this is sterile, of course. The only thing being disinfected is your sense of optimism. The instruments are rinsed in cold water, wiped dry on whatever's handy, and put right back on the tray for the next patient. If you're lucky, your operation will be quick. If not, you'll have plenty of time to contemplate why the bone saw has teeth. So as you stare up at the ceiling, heart pounding, you realize the surgeon's toolkit is less medical marvel and more yard sale gone terribly wrong. Still, these tools are all that stand between you and a feverish, oozing end. In Victorian surgery, it's not the instruments you fear most, it's that you know exactly what they're for. You're wheeled into a room filled with curious onlookers, students, other doctors, random men who just wanted a show. The audience is so close you can smell their breakfast, and one of them is already taking bets on how long you'll last. Privacy isn't invented until the 20th century. The walls are a dingy shade of cream, but you hardly notice over the press of humanity filling every bench and stair. This isn't just a hospital room, it's a Victorian amphitheatre, and you're the main attraction. The room slopes upward in a series of creaking wooden benches, packed elbow to elbow with men in waistcoats and top hats, each clutching a notepad, a sandwich, or, in the case of the truly dedicated, a handkerchief to dab away the rising scent of terror and formaldehyde. The noise is astonishing. Medical students whisper in Latin, trying to sound clever. An older physician loudly recalls the good old days when patients didn't squirm so much. In the back row, someone is distributing betting slips like it's the Grand National, and you're the unfortunate racehorse. The only thing missing is a popcorn vendor. At the front, a chalkboard lists today's procedures. 1. Amputation, right leg. 2. Removal, unspecified growth. 3. Lecture, gout. You try not to guess which one you're here for. But the orderly holding your stretcher keeps winking at you as if he knows you'll be the most memorable act of the day. Your surgeon steps forward, basking in the attention. He greets the room with a theatrical wave, brandishing his saw like a maestro with a baton. The students lean in, eyes wide, some equal parts fascinated and faintly nauseated. A few try to look nonchalant, but you spot more than one surreptitiously loosening their collars. A nurse pats your arm and offers a reassuring smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. "Just breathe," she says. "It'll be over soon." This is only slightly comforting, since the last patient being wheeled out seems to have taken her advice a little too literally. The floor is sticky underfoot, a mixture of sawdust and other, less savory substances. Every so often, someone sprinkles a fresh handful to soak up the excitement. The smell in the room is unforgettable. Sweat, soap, cheap cologne, and the faintly metallic tang of blood. Occasionally, a breeze from the open window offers a hint of London's fog and horse manure, which is, in this moment, a welcome improvement. As you're transferred to the operating table, a sturdy plank raised for better visibility, you realize you are, for a brief moment, the most popular person in London. If only it were for your charisma and not your ability to bleed on command. Your view is an intimidating wall of faces, most of whom have never performed surgery and are here to witness, learn, or just enjoy a little lunchtime spectacle. The show begins with a flourish. The surgeon explains the procedure to the room, referencing body parts you didn't know you had. He narrates his every move for the crowd. Observe, gentlemen, as I make the initial incision. The students scribble furiously, and one faints quietly into his friend's lap. Nobody moves to help. The onlookers are not all medical. Some are wealthy benefactors, eager to see where their charity has gone. Others are, let's say, hobbyists, people who simply enjoy a good spectacle. This is Victorian entertainment at its rawest. No ticket needed, just a strong stomach and a morbid curiosity. If you glance sideways, you might spot the local press. Yes, someone is writing a report for tomorrow's paper. If you're lucky, your procedure will be uneventful. If not, well, congratulations. You may soon be an inspiring tale of surgical bravery or a cautionary note in the obituaries. As the audience settles in and the surgeon sharpens his tools, you realize you have just enough time to regret everything. Your greatest hope is that, at the end of it all, you'll be remembered not for how loud you screamed, but for making it through with most of your dignity and at least some of your parts still intact. In Victorian medicine, everyone's a spectator. And you? Well, tonight, you're the main event. Before your procedure, you're offered the Victorian trifecta of comfort: a strong drink, a leather strap to bite down on, and some vague encouragement that it'll be over soon. You start to realize that soon is very much relative, depending on how steady the surgeon's hands are today. You glance down at the brandy. It's not the good stuff, nothing aged in barrels, just whatever was cheapest and strongest. The nurse pours you a generous slug and watches with the determined gaze of someone who's done this 100 times and cleaned up the aftermath at least as often. You tip the glass back, wincing at the burning sensation. Is it numbing your nerves or just lighting them on fire? Hard to say. But in Victorian medicine, a little liquid courage is as close as you're getting to anesthesia. Next comes the strap. It's thick, weathered leather, suspiciously tooth-marked and probably older than most of the patients in the ward. Here, bite down, the nurse instructs. As if this is a perfectly normal way to prepare for a major medical procedure. You take the strap, feeling both slightly reassured and more than a little like a horse being prepped for shoeing. On the bright side, if you do survive, you might just have the jaw strength to crack walnuts for the rest of your days. Now for the words of comfort. The surgeon, who looks like he's running late for both a funeral and a wedding, offers a few encouraging phrases. "You're in good hands," he says, glancing at his own hands as if checking for extra fingers. "We'll have you sorted in no time." His tone is calm, measured, and just a touch distracted, as though he's mentally reviewing his grocery list alongside your surgical plan. A few of the students, always eager, step forward to offer their own pep talks. It's mostly quick. One promises, "Last week's patient hardly screamed at all." Another says, "Think of something pleasant, like the time before you had this infection." You do your best, though your mind is racing through every possible outcome, from miraculous recovery to being remembered as the one who fainted before the first cut. The crowd, sensing the tension, quiets down. There's a collective holding of breath, as if everyone's hoping this will be one of the good ones. The rare procedures where the surgeon gets it right the first time, and nobody has to mop up quite so much drama. The nurse squeezes your shoulder and offers a kindly, if not entirely convincing, smile. "You're brave," she whispers. "Braver than most." You think you catch her winking at the orderly, but you choose to take it as a sign of confidence rather than a request for extra towels. Let's not forget the atmosphere. There's a certain camaraderie in the air, a sense that you and the rest of the doomed are in this together. A fellow patient calls out, "Save me some brandy if you don't need it all." Another offers sage advice. Focus on the ceiling beams, not the saw. Someone from the audience suggests, helpfully, "Just think of England." You're not sure if this is meant to be patriotic or just distracting, but at this point, you'll take anything. As the surgeon begins scrubbing, by which we mean half-heartedly wiping his hands on a cloth and possibly dipping them in cold water, you realize this is the Victorian version of a pre-game pep talk. There's no playlist, no meditation, no calming video of waves on a beach. There is only the sound of your own heart pounding, the distant clink of surgical tools, and the knowledge that over soon can mean anything from 3 minutes to a full season of regret. So you bite down, breathe deep, and hope that the brandy does its job. In the world of Victorian surgery, courage isn't about feeling brave, it's about surviving the pep talk, the procedure, and the punchline that you'll live to tell the tale at all. Ether is new, chloroform is still experimental, and most patients are still told to grit their teeth and think of England. The nurse asks if you'd like to try a whiff of something that smells like paint thinner. Otherwise, it's time to practice your silent screaming. Let's set the record straight. Anesthesia is the Wild West of Victorian medicine. If you happen to be in a fashionable London hospital in the late 1840s, you might be offered ether, the hottest new thing to hit the operating table since just get it over with. It comes in a glass bottle, poured onto a rag, and held over your face by a nurse with a reassuring smile and zero medical training. You take a sniff. Your nose burns. Your eyes water. For a brief moment, you wonder if your last meal is about to make a dramatic return. But ether is a luxury, and the odds of it actually knocking you out? About the same as winning the Victorian lottery. Slim, and with terrible consolation prizes. The dosage is a guessing game. Too little, and you're wide awake for the grand finale. Too much, and you risk never waking up at all. The surgeon keeps a close eye on you, not for safety, but because nobody likes a patient who flails mid-amputation. If you do drift off, congratulations. You'll likely come to in the middle of the operation, confused, furious, and convinced you're being murdered by a team of sweaty men in aprons. Which, to be fair, is technically accurate. If ether isn't on the menu, the hospital might offer chloroform. This is the trendier cousin, sometimes favored by doctors who like to feel modern and scientific. Chloroform is poured out in measured drops, though measured is a term used loosely, and sometimes just means however much it takes to make you stop complaining. Side effects include dizziness, nausea, and the uncomfortable sensation of briefly leaving your body to hover above the operating table, watching your own leg disappear. Still, better than nothing. For the vast majority of patients, though, anesthesia remains a pipe dream. Most surgeons still believe in the 3 pillars of Victorian pain relief: grit, brandy, and denial. You're instructed to hold very still, bite the leather strap, and be brave for the nice gentleman in the gallery. Some patients hum hymns, others recite poetry, and a few simply curse inventively for the entire duration of the procedure. Everyone copes in their own way. Your nurse offers you a hand to hold, which is reassuring until you realize she's using it mostly to keep you from launching yourself off the table. Meanwhile, in the corner, a student takes careful notes on your pain response. Subject screamed at decibel level equal to carriage wheel squeal. Impressive lung capacity. You wonder if there's a trophy for that, or if you'll just be remembered as the loud one. The air in the operating theatre is thick with the mingled scents of sweat, candle wax, and chemical fumes. Someone opens a window, but it does little to clear the atmosphere of impending disaster. The surgeon's eyes flick back and forth between you and the rag soaked in mystery fluid, clearly debating whether to top you up or just get started before you change your mind. You give a small nod, trying to look braver than you feel, and steel yourself for what's next. For those lucky few who do slip under, dreams come thick and strange, floating, falling, chasing after lost limbs in a haze of Victorian gloom. For everyone else, time stretches into something elastic and cruel. Seconds feel like hours. You count ceiling tiles. You count breaths. You count regrets. In the end, anesthesia is mostly a suggestion, a hopeful experiment in comfort that rarely delivers. But if you do wake up, battered but alive, you'll have a story to tell. The time you faced the blade, the saw, and the rag full of nightmares, and came through with your dignity mostly intact, if not your spleen. In Victorian surgery, you take what you can get. And sometimes, that's just a deep breath and a heroic attempt at not biting through the strap. The fastest surgeons are celebrities, able to remove a leg in under 3 minutes, which is great for their egos and sometimes good for your survival odds. The downside? Mistakes happen, and sometimes so do accidental amputations of things that weren't supposed to come off. Speed is everything. In the Victorian operating theatre, reputation isn't built on gentle bedside manner or thoughtful discussion of risks. It's built on sheer, unrelenting velocity. The surgeon with the quickest hands is the one everyone wants, at least everyone who's about to have their limbs sawn off. The logic is simple. Less time on the table means less time for pain, less time for blood loss, and, statistically speaking, less time to regret all your life choices. As you lie back, heart pounding, you hear stories about the legends Dr. Robert Liston, the fastest knife in the West End, known for removing limbs at a pace that would impress most magicians and terrify most lumberjacks. 3 minutes is considered leisurely, 2 is ideal. Anything under 90 seconds and people start looking around for hidden engines or sleight of hand. The audience, yes, there's always an audience, leans forward in anticipation, as though you're about to break a world record. Not a femur. The preparation is brisk. The assistant grips your leg, the nurse presses down on your shoulders, and the surgeon flexes his fingers, bouncing on the balls of his feet like a boxer before a prize fight. He gives you a wink, perhaps meant to be reassuring, but which mostly suggests, "I hope you're ready for this, because I'm not slowing down." Then, in a flurry of movement, it begins. The saw descends, and the entire room shifts into a sort of grim choreography. The noise is unforgettable, a sound somewhere between a butcher's shop and a carpentry workshop. If you're lucky, you'll faint from the shock or the pain and miss the gory details. If not, you'll be keenly aware of every pass of the blade and every encouraging shout from the gallery. "He's almost through," someone yells, as if cheering on a marathon runner. Speed, of course, comes at a price. The surgeon's hand, moving too quickly, may slip. There are legendary tales of surgeons so focused on breaking their own records that they've accidentally sawed into the assistant's fingers, or, in one infamous case, managed to cut off 2 fingers, an extra bit of skin, and possibly the patient's dignity in one fell swoop. Rumor has it, one record holder once managed a 300% mortality rate, patient, assistant, and a bystander who fainted and hit his head. Victorian efficiency at its finest. But don't get too smug about modern medicine. Even today, there's something to be said for a doctor who knows how to get in and get out before you've had time to Google your symptoms and spiral into existential panic. In the Victorian age, though, the trade-off is more obvious. The longer you're on the table, the more likely you are to bleed out, go into shock, or catch an infection from the audience's shoes. Some surgeons are so proud of their speed that they keep a tally on the wall, each mark representing another successful amputation. You can almost hear the sports commentator, "And he's off. He rounds the kneecap in record time. Look at that elbow grease." And across the finish line with only minor collateral damage. The applause, such as it is, feels as much for the surgeon as for your plucky ability to not bite through your own tongue. When it's over, your surgeon steps back, flushed with pride, sweat glistening on his brow. The crowd murmurs. The nurse mops your brow, and you, assuming you're still conscious, marvel at the fact that it's only been 2 minutes since you last had 2 legs. In Victorian surgery, you didn't want a slow, thoughtful operator. You wanted someone who could beat the clock and, ideally, keep all your major organs attached. The speed of the saw was a matter of survival. The rest was just cleanup. Your surgeon proudly wears his oldest, crustiest coat. The more blood, the more experience. Germ theory hasn't caught on yet, so the only thing getting a good wash is the floor, and only if someone important slips. In Victorian hospitals, cleanliness is a slippery concept. The surgeon's apron is a living archive of every operation he's ever performed, each stain commemorating a battle fought, and sometimes lost, against a leg, a lump, or an especially feisty appendix. Some surgeons wear their blood-stiffened coats until they're closer to sculpture than clothing, each layer another badge of honor. You might think it's a health hazard. In 1847, it's just a sign you're dealing with a seasoned professional, at least one who knows how to get close to the action. Your own sense of unease grows as you notice the rest of the staff. The nurse's apron, though slightly less dramatic, is equally well used. Her cap is askew, her hands red and chapped from scrubbing. Not the instruments, but the night's porridge pot. You spot the assistant polishing a scalpel with a rag he just sneezed into, while students huddle in the background, trying to figure out which stains are ketchup and which are yesterday's successful operation. Let's be clear. Nothing is disinfected. The only sterilization is the surgeon waving his tools around a candle for dramatic effect, possibly to warm them up before digging in. Instruments are wiped on whatever is handy, a sleeve, a corner of the blanket, or, if you're truly lucky, the surgeon's own hair. Water, if it's used at all, is cold and usually has more floating in it than just bubbles. If you find yourself wondering about hand washing, don't. The closest you'll see is a surgeon dousing his hands in whiskey between sips, or a student giving his nails a cursory glance before tucking right in. The idea that invisible, microscopic germs could kill you is still considered radical science fiction, like time travel or women voting. It's not just the people. The operating table, too, is a study in reusable history. Each groove, nick, and scratch is a reminder of previous patients. Sawdust is sprinkled generously underfoot to soak up the inevitable rivers of blood, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a mop that isn't as dirty as the floor itself. If a stain starts to smell truly offensive, someone might throw a towel over it and call it character. Oddly enough, these grisly conditions are a point of pride. Surgeons boast about their coats the way modern doctors talk about their degrees. The crustier the apron, the more likely the man behind it is to have a string of successes, if by success you mean patients who survived, or at least didn't haunt him. Young surgeons dream of someday having an apron so impressively foul that it stands up on its own. There are even rumors of legendary coats so thick with old blood they could stop a stray bullet. Occasionally, someone in the audience, a visitor perhaps, or a very nervous new nurse, asks about all the mess. "Shouldn't we tidy up, sir?" The surgeon just chuckles. "The blood keeps the cloth supple," he explains, which is not only untrue but somehow makes the whole situation worse. And so the stains accumulate, layer upon layer, like a ghastly lasagna. This hygiene extends to post-surgical care. Dressings are reused if they look mostly clean, and bandages are only replaced if they start crawling away on their own. If you're lucky, your wound is swabbed with something vaguely medicinal, like turpentine or brandy. If not, you get a pat on the head and the advice to keep it dry. In a hospital where the roof leaks and the cat bathes in the water pail, you stare at your surgeon, hoping against hope that somewhere in all those crusty layers is a clean conscience. In Victorian surgery, however, the only thing guaranteed to be washed is your optimism. So, next time you see a spotless white coat in a modern hospital, maybe take a moment to appreciate it. Because in the 1840s, the messier the surgeon, the more you were supposed to trust him. It's not comforting, but it is historic. A team of burly men, sometimes students, sometimes hospital porters, sometimes just the biggest people available, are recruited to keep you still. There's no anesthesia, so it's all about brute force, optimism, and a complete disregard for patient dignity. It starts innocently enough. The surgeon gestures, and suddenly, you're surrounded by a small rugby team in mismatched coats. Some are official staff, some are just passing through and got conscripted, and at least one is definitely the hospital's baker, recruited purely for his biceps. Their job is to pin you down. Yours is to not embarrass yourself by screaming louder than the last patient. Victorian operating rooms are less about bedside manner and more about crowd control. You lie back on the plank, masquerading as a table, taking in the sight of 4 to 6 large hands clamping down on your arms, legs, and, just in case, your forehead. The nurse pats your shoulder. "He's a wriggler, this one," she says, as if discussing a trout and not a person about to have something vital removed. She nods to the nearest student, who tightens his grip and smiles apologetically, perhaps remembering last week's incident when the patient managed to knee the surgeon in the shin. The room is suddenly all business. The surgeon checks that you're firmly immobilized, with the kind of attention to detail you wish he'd devote to cleaning his instruments. One man holds your shoulders down, another pins your knee. A third is ready to cover your mouth, should the need arise for extra quiet encouragement. There's a kind of unspoken choreography. When the saw appears, everyone leans in just a bit harder. Meanwhile, the audience leans in too, eager for the show. Some are here to learn, some to gossip, some just because they lost a bet. The noise of the crowd fades into background static as the reality of what's about to happen sets in. You lock eyes with the man holding your arm, a burly porter with hands like hams, who gives you a reassuring nod. "Don't worry, I haven't dropped anyone all week," he whispers. Comforting, sort of. It's not just brute strength at work, though. There's technique. Some veterans know just how to shift their weight to counter a flailing leg or a last-second attempt at escape. Others simply hope for the best and brace themselves for impact. If a patient does manage to wriggle free, chaos briefly reigns. Students scatter, the nurse issues stern warnings, and the surgeon sighs heavily, already composing a story for the break room. You can't help but notice the complete lack of privacy. Your body is now communal property, twisted and turned for the best angle of approach. Modesty, like pain relief, has been left in the corridor. The gown you're wearing, if you're lucky enough to have one, is quickly pushed aside as the surgeon marks his chosen site with a bit of chalk and a lot of squinting. You close your eyes, try to remember your happy place, and prepare yourself for the grip of a lifetime. If the procedure is especially gruesome, a well-timed distraction may be attempted. The nurse leans in and starts chatting about the weather or the Queen's latest hat, hoping to keep your mind off the impending doom. Sometimes, someone offers you a leather strap to bite down on, just in case you're feeling vocal. You realize this is less about muffling your screams and more about keeping you from biting anyone's fingers off. As the surgeon gives the signal to begin, the entire team braces. For a few surreal seconds, everyone is united in a common cause. Don't let the patient escape. It's an odd kind of intimacy, the sort that leaves everyone a little breathless and no one wanting to make eye contact later. So you grit your teeth, feel the weight of 6 strangers holding you tight, and hope that brute force and Victorian optimism will somehow see you through. In this era, medicine isn't gentle. It's a group project, and everyone's got their hands on the patient. There's raucous applause as the first incision is made. Medical students take notes. Ordinary folks faint, and someone in the balcony shouts encouragement. You, meanwhile, are hoping not to be the live demonstration that ends up in the footnotes of next year's textbooks. Victorian surgery isn't just a medical event, it's the hottest ticket in town, the Wimbledon of wincing. The operating theatre is built for drama, tiered benches packed to the rafters with every variety of gawker, from bright-eyed medical apprentices to wealthy donors hoping to see something memorable before lunch. There's no such thing as a private operation. Instead, it's a kind of cross between a university lecture and a boxing match. The more famous the surgeon, the bigger the crowd. As the surgeon steps forward, you can feel the electricity in the room. Students jostle for the best view, their notebooks open and ready for a grisly close-up. Some try to act nonchalant, but the ones in the front row keep their shoes tucked back from the drip zone, an important lesson learned the hard way. The more squeamish spectators grip the railing with white knuckles, faces green around the gills, but determined not to miss a moment. After all, nothing says education quite like nearly passing out before noon. At the back, it's standing room only. Gentlemen in top hats swap rumors about last week's amazing case. 3 limbs, 2 minutes, no screaming, almost a record. A few ladies, chaperoned and fan-fluttering, have managed to sneak in. They murmur excitedly and compare notes on the surgeon's mustache or speculate about whether anyone will faint more dramatically than they do. For those who can't bear the gore, there's always a convenient fainting couch nearby. Victorian hospitals are nothing if not prepared for their own entertainment value. Someone in the peanut gallery starts a betting pool. 5 shillings says the patient's out cold by the first cut. 10 on the student in the blue waistcoat fainting before the bone saw comes out. It's all part of the show. Occasionally, an enterprising orderly circulates with refreshments, just in case anyone needs a fortifying nip of brandy or a hard biscuit to gnaw on while the action unfolds. Meanwhile, you, the star of this particular production, are left with the cold comfort that your pain is at least not being suffered in silence. Every gasp, twitch, or valiant attempt at not screaming is met with eager scribbling or sympathetic nods. The bolder students whisper anatomical terms, nudging each other with excitement every time something particularly messy happens. If you're unlucky, you'll hear them arguing, "Is that the femoral artery or the tibial vein?" You really hope they figure it out before it's your turn. For the surgeon, this is more than a procedure, it's a performance. He flourishes his saw with all the showmanship of a circus ringmaster, pausing now and then for commentary or to answer questions from the gallery. Observe the steady hand, gentlemen. See how the blade glides through tissue. You'd rather not. But the audience eats it up. There's laughter at every joke, applause for every confident movement, and a collective gasp whenever things look dicey. It's as much a social occasion as a surgical one. Of course, there's a dark edge to the proceedings. Not every operation ends with applause. Sometimes, a silence falls. The kind that makes you grateful you can't see your own medical chart. The students learn just as much from failure as from success. And your greatest hope is that you won't become a cautionary tale told in next week's lecture. But as the surgery progresses, you notice something almost comforting in the chaos. The audience's fascination, however ghoulish, is also a form of community. You're not alone in your ordeal. Hundreds of eyes are on you, sharing your fear, your pain, and, if you're lucky, your relief. So you steel yourself, hope for the best, and pray that if you do become famous, it's for the right reasons. In the Victorian operating theatre, everyone gets a role, star, spectator, or story for the next generation of doctors. Between the open wounds, the unwashed linens, and the festive aroma of infection, the air is thick enough to chew. Candles burn in a feeble attempt to cover the stench. But you're mostly breathing in a blend of sweat, fear, and gangrene. If you thought modern hospitals had a certain antiseptic tang, the Victorian operating theatre offers an olfactory experience so vivid, you can practically taste the history. Before you've even made it to the table, the smell hits you like a physical blow. It's not just bad. It's transformative, like being smacked in the face with a moldy mattress and a ham that's seen too many summers. Your first instinct is to breathe through your mouth. Your second is to reconsider every life choice that brought you here. The smell has layers. The top note is sharp and metallic, blood, fresh and not so fresh, soaking into sawdust, dripping from aprons, and pooling in corners where sunlight fears to linger. Underneath that is the sour, musky aroma of sweat. The collective perspiration of a dozen patients, 3 surgeons, 4 nurses, and an audience of onlookers who skipped their morning bath in solidarity. Everyone is sweating for different reasons, but the combined effect is something between a locker room and a cheese shop in late July. Below that is the stifling undertone of decay. Infection is everywhere. Open wounds ooze onto linen that hasn't seen a wash tub since Queen Victoria's coronation. Bandages ferment quietly on windowsills. You catch a whiff of pus and something greenish. And suddenly you understand why so many medical students choose to take notes from the back row. If you're lucky, the breeze occasionally brings a hint of carbolic acid. If you're very lucky, because that means at least someone, somewhere, has heard of Joseph Lister. Otherwise, you make do with the competing scents of candle wax and whatever cologne the surgeon splashed on that morning to cover up his apron's more historic contributions. Let's not forget the unsung contributors, the linens. Bedsheets are supposed to be white, but in this room they're all shades of brown, yellow, and a suspicious grey. Each is a canvas of past procedures, dotted with stains that resist all efforts at storytelling and all attempts at scrubbing. The pillow beneath your head smells faintly of mildew, old barley soup, and just a hint of antiseptic wishful thinking. Even the candles struggle. Someone, possibly with a cruel sense of humour, brought in a few scented ones, but lavender and rose are no match for the robust bouquet of human suffering. Occasionally, a draught whips through, and the flames sputter, stirring up new swirls of hospital chic. The audience in the upper gallery dabs at their noses with handkerchiefs soaked in vinegar, hoping to blunt the olfactory assault. Medical students pinch their nostrils shut with their own sleeve cuffs. For the truly prepared, a slice of orange peel held beneath the nose is worth its weight in gold. No one is immune. The surgeons themselves, so proud of their experience, become connoisseurs of the air, able to diagnose a festering wound from 3 feet away, or at least claim to, between sips of medicinal brandy. Nurses take bets on which patient will turn green first. The cat skulking in the corner looks offended by the whole affair. To distract yourself, you might try focusing on anything else. The pattern of cracks in the wall, the flicker of candlelight, the steady drone of the surgeon's monologue. But the smell is relentless, clinging to your hair, your clothes, your memories. When this is all over, you'll swear you can still smell it in your dreams. In the end, there's no escaping it. The Victorian hospital has a signature scent, a complex, unforgettable perfume that says life, death, and absolutely no chance of a refund. In this era, the smell is just part of the treatment. The real challenge is not letting it finish you off before the surgery even starts. There's no blood transfusion, and the surgeon seems to have a casual relationship with the concept of too much blood. It's not unusual for your entire bed, and possibly your neighbors, to be soaked by the time the surgery is over. Good thing you wore your brown trousers. The thing about Victorian surgery is that blood isn't just a side effect. It's practically part of the decor. The operating theatre doubles as an avant-garde art gallery, where splashes, spurts, and splatters become the latest in medical wallpaper. If Jackson Pollock had been born a century earlier, he would have been right at home here, and probably would have left with fewer limbs. From the moment the first incision is made, the atmosphere shifts from anticipation to full-scale liquid chaos. Blood pours with a theatrical gusto that no stage production could ever match. The nurse grabs a bucket and some rags, standard Victorian issue, guaranteed not to be clean. The sawdust on the floor soaks up the overflow, but the air soon grows thick with the scent of iron, sweat, and resignation. The surgeon, unfazed, works with the breezy confidence of someone whose shoes have seen more action than your entire circulatory system. Bit of bleeding, nothing unusual, he declares, as though you're shedding a polite cupful and not enough to paint the lower half of the operating table. His apron, already a shade of mature maroon, darkens with each pass of the blade. If he's feeling especially optimistic, he'll clamp an artery and offer a cheery, "Hold this, would you?" to a nearby student whose face instantly drains of color. In theory, there are ways to slow the bleeding. A heated iron, pressed to the wound, sometimes does the trick, along with producing a truly memorable aroma and a brand new set of regrets. Silk threads or bits of catgut might be used to tie off blood vessels, but these often break or slip, transforming your operation into a timed challenge. Can the surgeon finish before you run out of blood, patience, or both? Every few minutes, a nurse leans in to mop your brow, or, more accurately, to keep sweat from mixing with the already impressive pools of red gathering under your pillow. If you're still awake at this point, you might notice your toes growing cold or your vision tunneling. But don't worry, this is normal. At least in 1847, there's a camaraderie to blood loss in the Victorian ward. The patient in the next bed offers a weak thumbs up as the color drains from his face and onto the sheets. The nurse swaps out the rags, wrings them out in a bucket, and puts them right back into service, barely missing a beat. If the pile of used linen gets too high, someone simply tosses it out the window. You hope, for the sake of the pedestrians below, that there's a warning sign. Occasionally, a medical student faints, which is considered good luck. "A bit of a bloodbath today," the surgeon jokes, waving his saw at the gallery, and the audience titters nervously. The phrase "lost a bit more than expected" is the Victorian equivalent of "oops." It's said so casually. You wonder if there's a running tally somewhere, another record to break for the benefit of the medical journals. The aftermath is equally artistic. Once you're bandaged, if you're bandaged, your bed looks like the scene of a particularly enthusiastic tomato festival. The nurses will dab at the stains, but there's little hope of returning anything to its original color. You lie there, dazed and depleted, grateful for the thin soup and thick blankets, but mostly for the fact that you're still breathing. In a time before blood transfusions, and with only the vaguest notion of internal volume, survival often comes down to luck, speed, and stubbornness. In the end, every scar tells a story, and every stain on the floor is a reminder of the day you gave a little, or a lot, for Victorian medical science. Congratulations! You've just contributed to the latest round of Victorian redecorating. Joseph Lister hasn't arrived yet, so infection is just a fun bonus round. The surgeon occasionally wipes his hands on his apron, sometimes between patients, sometimes on his way out to lunch. This is a time before germ theory, when the invisible world of bacteria and viruses was still the stuff of fairy tales. No one's heard of hand sanitizer, and the closest thing to cleanliness is a brisk breeze blowing through an open window. The surgical tray gets a wipe with a damp cloth. And, if you're really lucky, the tools are dipped in lukewarm water before use. That's not hygiene. It's hydration. Your surgeon, proud of his practical experience, views antiseptic as a French word for cowards. Why waste good whiskey on wounds when it's so much more useful for calming the nerves before the next patient? A quick rinse, a half-hearted scrape of dried blood, and those bone sores are ready for another round in the spotlight. If you're ever curious about the taste of history, just ask for a lick of the forceps, but maybe don't. Infection is inevitable, expected, and generally shrugged off. The concept that wounds should stay clean is considered novel, possibly unmanly, and definitely not something to slow down a 3-minute amputation for. The most common post-surgical advice is to rest and keep your spirits up. If you start to feel feverish or spot red streaks climbing up your arm, the response is, at best, a new bandage, and, at worst, a priest. Let's be honest. Wounds are not just open to the elements, they're actively inviting in the entire microbial population of London. Surgical bandages are reused and recycled, often more whole than fabric. If a wound smells funny, that's not a warning sign, it's just Wednesday. Some medical students claim they can diagnose hospital gangrene by scent alone. The winning answer? It smells like a wet dog fighting a wheel of old cheese. There's no award for that. Unless you count not passing out. Sometimes, a bit of carbolic acid or vinegar makes an appearance, splashed around the room or dabbed on wounds. This is less about killing germs and more about convincing everyone present that at least someone is trying. If you're truly unfortunate, you might get a poultice of questionable herbs from the hospital herbalist, whose qualifications include a strong opinion and a mustache even more impressive than the surgeon's. Meanwhile, the surgeons compare notes on their success rates. If a limb turns black and falls off 2 days after surgery, it's chalked up to bad luck or weak constitution. He just didn't want it enough, one doctor shrugs. A patient who walks away, limb intact and still alive, becomes a minor legend. Everyone else joins the growing list of hospital martyrs who, in the end, taught future surgeons the value of pure guesswork. Patients themselves develop a sixth sense about infection. If your wound is angry, swollen, red, oozing, and developing its own personality, you get extra sympathy and maybe a bigger share of the evening brandy. Rumors swirl about miraculous recoveries, usually involving chicken soup, holy water, or in rare cases, moving to another country. The real killer is sepsis, though nobody calls it that yet. You're just taken ill with a bad turn. Chills, sweating, pain that doesn't fade. These are seen as fate, not biology. The only intervention is time, prayer, and the hope that your immune system is more Victorian than the hospital cat. So as the surgeon wipes his hands on his apron and you drift off into a fevered, pus-filled sleep, you can rest assured. In the 1840s, antiseptics are just a twinkle in Joseph Lister's future mustache. Until then, survival is equal parts luck, stubbornness, and a refusal to look too closely at what's under your bandage. In the grand tradition of Victorian medicine, infection isn't a complication, it's just the sequel. You're bandaged with whatever's available, linen strips, old shirts, possibly a page from the Times, and instructed to rest and stay positive. The odds of living are about 50-50, unless you start feeling hot and shivery. In that case, a priest may be summoned. Victorian surgical aftercare isn't so much a science as it is a form of high-stakes improv. Once your limb is off, your wound is closed, or, optimistically, wrapped, and the show is over, you're trundled back to your straw-stuffed mattress for what passes as recovery. Your job now is to stay as still as possible and avoid thinking about the phrase hospital gangrene. The staff, meanwhile, embarks on a grand experiment in creative bandaging and optimistic guessing. First up, the dressings. There is no such thing as a sterile environment. Bandages are made from whatever's handy: torn-up nightgowns, unraveling scarves, or the sleeve of a recently expired patient. If the ward is running low on supplies, you might find yourself wrapped in a page from yesterday's newspaper, complete with news about a local cricket match and an advertisement for miracle hair tonics. At least you'll never be bored. Instructions are minimal. Don't let it get too wet. Don't pick at it. Don't scream unless it's urgent. There's no real consensus on how to promote healing, other than the vague advice to keep your spirits up and think happy thoughts. Medical optimism in the 1840s is about as effective as antibiotics, which is to say, not at all. If your fever spikes, the nurse will check your pulse, mutter something about bad airs, and send for the doctor, who's either in the pub or preparing his next patient for a brush with destiny. Pain management consists of whatever is at hand: a thimble of laudanum, a glass of cheap port, a well-meaning slap on the back, or, if you're lucky, nothing at all, because that means you're already numb from shock. Whining is discouraged, but not uncommon. Your fellow patients have developed their own support system: a chorus of moans, snarky jokes, and occasionally betting pools on who will be the first to recover and who will be the next to take a bad turn. Hygiene remains theoretical. If your bandage looks damp, smells suspicious, or is moving on its own, the nurse will sigh and swap it for something slightly less horrifying. Water is precious, so most wounds are dabbed at with cold tea, beer, or, in emergencies, the same rag used for wiping down the windowsill. Bathing is discouraged on the grounds that it opens the pores to mischief, and most patients simply marinate in their own post-surgical funk. The nurse, overworked and perpetually unimpressed, does her best to check for signs of healing, namely, that your wound is no longer hissing, swelling, or leaking colors not found in nature. If things look promising, you're congratulated. If not, a priest is summoned to see you through, though his bedside manner is mostly just gentle reminders to make your peace and keep still. There are no charts or monitors. Instead, your prognosis is whispered among the staff like a betting tip. I give him 3 days, tops. Oh, he's a fighter. He'll last the week. Morale in the ward swings between grim humor and outright denial. You're praised for every small victory: sitting up, keeping food down, not hallucinating about your grandmother in the rafters. If you're lucky enough to survive, you're given a hearty handshake, a stiff upper lip, and maybe even your own crutch or wooden leg, fashioned by the hospital carpenter between actual repairs. You join the select ranks of Victorian survivors, a group united by grit, gallows humor, and the constant surprise that you're still alive. So you lie back. Take a deep breath, ideally through your mouth, and hope for the best. In Victorian aftercare, survival isn't guaranteed, but the stories are legendary. Recovery means subsisting on watery soup, stale bread, and tea strong enough to dissolve a spoon. If you can keep it down, you're considered halfway to recovery. If not, well, you weren't meant for this cruel world anyway. Food in the Victorian hospital is less about nourishment and more about managing expectations downward. You quickly learn that flavor is a luxury and texture is an afterthought. The centerpiece of every meal is gruel, a pale, trembling substance somewhere between oatmeal and existential despair. The cook insists it's wholesome, but it looks suspiciously like something you'd patch a wall with. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner are identical. Variation comes only in the level of congealment. Sometimes it's hot, sometimes it's tepid, but it's always the same shade of what if sadness had a color. The first spoonful is a test of your willpower. If you can swallow without wincing or asking for last rites, you earn the respect of the entire ward. Bread is the gruel's faithful companion, though bread is an optimistic term for what is essentially a brick masquerading as food. It arrives at your bedside with a satisfying thud and the power to chip a tooth at 10 paces. Some patients use it to mop up the soup, others use it as a doorstop, a missile to ward off particularly aggressive rats, or as a reminder of why they miss their mother's cooking. If you're lucky, there's a smear of something yellowish on top, possibly butter, possibly a dare. And then there's the tea. Oh, the tea. In theory, it's the great British comfort. But in the hospital, it's a murky, scalding potion that tastes like it was brewed from disappointment and boot polish. The first sip singes your tongue and your hope. A good cup can stand a spoon upright. A bad cup dissolves the spoon outright. You find yourself daydreaming about cold water, only to remember what happened the last time someone drank from the tap. Of course, mealtime is also a social occasion, a chance for patients to commiserate, complain, and compare strategies for making gruel less offensive. One fellow patient swears by adding a pinch of salt, though nobody can find any. Another claims that if you eat it with your eyes closed and hum "God Save the Queen," it goes down easier. Mostly you just choke it back and pray for a distraction. Hospital staff are well practiced in the art of lowering expectations. If it's warm, it's fresh, the nurse says, slopping out another bowl. If it's chewy, just swallow faster. Some try to offer encouragement, good for the constitution, while others simply shrug and move on, clearly counting the days until the next shipment of actual food arrives. If you can manage a second helping, you're instantly promoted to robust status. Those who lose their appetite are eyed nervously by the nurse, who knows all too well what that can mean in a place where calories are as scarce as clean hand towels. On rare occasions, a kindly visitor might sneak in a biscuit, a piece of cheese, or even a bruised apple. These are treasures, shared with the discretion of jewel thieves and enjoyed in secret under the blankets. Despite it all, there's a sense of camaraderie around the meal cart. Everyone is in the same soup-soaked boat after all. Jokes fly about mystery meat and ghost peas. Someone starts a rumor about roast chicken in the private ward, but nobody really believes it. Mealtime becomes a ritual, 1 part sustenance, 2 parts stubborn hope, and a pinch of black humor. As you scrape the bottom of your bowl, you realize that surviving Victorian hospital food is almost as impressive as surviving Victorian surgery. If you can keep it down, you're halfway to healing. If you can keep smiling, you're a miracle of modern medicine, or at least modern gruel. Bon appetit. Morphine exists, but most pain relief consists of friendly advice and maybe a little laudanum if you're lucky. More often, you just get a cheerful chin-up and a fresh bite of the same old leather strap. In the Victorian hospital, pain management is a mysterious art, somewhere between motivational speaking and creative distraction. True, the staff technically have access to opiates, but those are tightly rationed for the patients who are loudest, wealthiest, or most in danger of biting the surgeon. The rest? Well, you get the comfort of British stoicism and whatever's left in the nurse's apron pocket. After surgery, you're handed the legendary leather strap. By now, you're on a first-name basis with it, its chewy, worn edges shaped by the jawlines of generations before you. Don't be shy, the nurse tells you, it's seen worse. If you complain, she tells you to picture yourself on a sunny beach, far away from your newly missing limb and the man with the saw. It's not much, but at least it keeps your mind busy. There's laudanum, of course, tincture of opium mixed with alcohol, a concoction so potent it's banned in most modern realities. Here, though, it's medicine, miracle, and morale booster all in one. You get a few drops in a chipped mug, and for a moment, You float on a warm, fuzzy cloud where nothing matters, not even the fact that your leg is throbbing like a church bell on Sunday. Too much laudanum, though, and you'll be asleep until the 20th century, or at least until the next round of soup. Morphine is even rarer, a precious powder doled out to patients who are, as the nurse puts it, screaming loud enough to wake the Queen. It comes by syringe, injected with much ceremony and a surprising amount of side-eye. If you're very lucky, or very rich, you might score a dose. If not, there's always the backup plan. Polite conversation and a distracting hymn or two. Music is a surprisingly popular strategy. A hospital orderly with a battered violin will sometimes wander the ward, playing mournful tunes that are supposed to calm you, though more often they just make you wish you had earplugs. Patients hum along, partly out of solidarity, partly to drown out the sound of their own moaning. One inventive patient once started a ward sing-along to God Save the Queen, just to keep spirits up. It almost worked until the surgeon joined in. The rest of pain relief relies on psychology and sheer denial. Nurses tell stories, offer gossip, and occasionally break out a deck of cards for a round of who can ignore their wound the longest. Advice flows freely. Just grit your teeth, says the old man in the next bed. Think of the Empire. Someone else swears by deep breathing. Someone else swears. Full stop. Ice packs are a fantasy, cold compresses are rare, and actual rest is a privilege you might enjoy if you're exceptionally boring or particularly unconscious. Most of the time, pain is just another background noise, competing with the coughs, groans, and faint applause from the operating theatre next door. Oddly enough, there's comfort in the camaraderie. Everyone hurts, everyone copes. One patient draws cartoons in the margins of his bandages. Another invents limericks about hospital food. You swap survival tips, share half-remembered prayers, and compete to see who can look the least bothered by a freshly tightened bandage. In the end, pain management is about endurance. You clench your jaw, count your blessings, and focus on the world beyond the ward. Sunlight, birdsong, the possibility of a future where the only thing you bite is a real biscuit, not a leather strap. So chin up. It hurts, but you're not alone. In Victorian surgery, pain is inevitable, but a stiff upper lip is always in ready supply. You survive the surgery, but now comes the challenge of Victorian prosthetics, splintery, clunky, and so uncomfortable you briefly consider hopping everywhere instead. Victorian medicine, ever the innovator, believes that once your wound is mostly closed, and you're no longer running a fever high enough to hallucinate Queen Victoria in your water jug, you're ready for the next marvel of 19th century technology. The wooden leg. It arrives at your bedside with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for royal decrees or new batches of hospital gruel. The hospital carpenter, a man whose resume includes chairs, coffins, and, on a slow week, the odd dining table, presents you with your very own peg. Your first glimpse is not reassuring. The leg is heavy, roughly hewn, and only slightly less intimidating than the saw that took your real limb. Sanded for comfort, it still boasts enough splinters to make every step a gamble. The straps are leather, stiff with age and rumor. You suspect the last person who wore them now haunts the hallways, looking for his missing sock. The fitting process is a team effort. The nurse brings a pile of old rags to cushion the stump. The carpenter adjusts his creation, occasionally pausing to hammer a rogue nail or offer woodworking tips. Just needs breaking in, he assures you, as if you're discussing new shoes, not an entire replacement limb. The ward watches in fascination, secretly betting on whether you'll topple over before you reach the chamber pot. Taking your first steps is an event. There's applause, some nervous laughter, and a chorus of advice from fellow patients, many of whom have also been introduced to the joys of Victorian mobility aids. Lead with your good foot. Don't lock your knee. If it creaks, just lean left. You try, wobbling along the ward, clinging to furniture, patients, and occasionally the hospital cat, who is not impressed. If you're lucky, you get a fancy model, one with a metal hinge at the knee and a strap that almost stays buckled. These are reserved for gentlemen of means, war heroes, and, on rare occasions, anyone who can catch the carpenter on a generous day. The rest make do with pegs, crutches, and a lot of creative swearing. There's little in the way of physical therapy. Mostly you're told to keep at it and mind the stairs. Gravity does the rest. Social life changes. You become instantly recognizable, part of an exclusive club of survivors. Other amputees nod at you in the street, and children follow you with wide-eyed fascination, eager to see the new wooden wonder. At the pub, your peg leg is a conversation starter. A footnote, no pun intended, in every story you tell. If it's winter, you learn to avoid icy patches. If it's summer, you learn that wood expands. Squeaking becomes your personal theme music. There are moments of humor. Someone paints a smiley face on the end of your peg. Another patient suggests adding a drawer for snacks. You develop a newfound respect for pirates, though the only booty you're after is a padded seat and a moment's peace. The downsides, however, are real. The leg rubs, blisters form, the straps bite. You dream of soft shoes and cloud-like insoles. On bad days, you curse every splinter and wish for an upgrade. A dream that, for most Victorians, remains just that. And yet, you adapt. You develop a new walk, part shuffle, part swagger. You tell jokes about having a leg up on the competition. In time, you find yourself grateful for small mercies. The carpenter's handiwork, the nurse's patience, and the fact that you're alive to complain about it all. In the end, life on a wooden peg is about resilience, wit, and the stubborn refusal to let gravity, or 19th century carpentry, keep you down. You survived Victorian surgery. Everything after that is just a balancing act. You're surrounded by a chorus of coughs, moans, and creative swearing. Bonds are forged over shared trauma and the universal wish to avoid the surgeon's favorite status. A Victorian hospital ward is less a place of healing and more a makeshift club for the chronically unlucky. Beds line every available inch, each filled with its own unique brand of misery and a personality to match. Conversation drifts through the air, stitched together by the soft music of wheezing lungs and the persistent percussion of someone's foot twitching against a bedpost. Your neighbors become your family, for better or worse. There's old Tommy, who lost 3 fingers and gained 5 conspiracy theories. Next to him is Mrs. Peabody, a woman who claims she once gave Florence Nightingale a stern talking to. At the far end is a fellow who insists his wound is mostly cosmetic, despite the fact that his bandages are held together with string and hope. Everyone is nursing something. Some a missing limb, others a broken spirit, all united in the common goal of surviving the next doctor's rounds. The atmosphere swings between gallows, humor, and outright complaint. Jokes are currency. Heard they're doing 2-for-1 amputations today. Someone quips, and groans ripple through the room, half in laughter, half in terror. Any announcement of the surgeon is making his way down the ward is met with sudden interest in sleep, prayer, or fake snoring. No one wants to be the next interesting case. Stories flow freely, lubricated by shared suffering and the occasional sip of smuggled brandy. You swap tales of accidents, misdiagnoses, and heroic escapes from leeches. Every so often, a patient will try to one-up the rest. Lost a leg? Try losing a leg and your favorite hat in the same week. Respect is earned not by stoicism, but by the creativity of your complaints and the drama of your bandage changes. The nurses, saints in aprons, manage their flock with a mix of sharp wit and sharper elbows. They arbitrate arguments. No, Mr. Phelps, you can't swap wounds with Mr. Hargreaves just because his looks smaller, and enforce the sacred law of no moaning after midnight. A well-placed glare from matron is enough to quell even the most theatrical lamentations. At night, the ward changes. Shadows stretch across the floor as oil lamps flicker. The bravest patient tells ghost stories, which somehow always involve haunted bandages and vengeful medical students. Someone snores. Someone else talks in their sleep about a runaway cart horse. The rest listen, laugh, and try not to think about the throbbing pain in their various extremities. Despite the bleakness, real friendships form. You learn the secrets of hospital survival, how to sneak a second serving of gruel, which orderly will help you to the privy without complaint, who has the softest pillow, usually the patient with the worst wound. You develop an unspoken alliance. Whoever hears the surgeon's footsteps first will whistle a warning, giving everyone else just enough time to look as uninteresting as possible. Some patients come and go, healed, or at least mobile enough to be discharged. New faces appear, shell-shocked and pale, clutching their meager possessions and a deep sense of dread. The veterans welcome them with a mix of sympathy and playful menace. Watch out for the soup, it bites back. Through it all, the ward is a living organism, breathing, groaning, and, on the best days, laughing together. Shared adversity becomes a kind of glue, binding you to strangers who, just a week ago, would have crossed the street to avoid your infectious optimism. In the Victorian hospital, you don't get to choose your roommates. But you do get to choose whether to endure the ordeal alone or with a new gang of equally miserable, surprisingly resilient companions. And as you'll discover, the real medicine is the laughter echoing between coughs and the comfort of knowing someone else will cover for you if the surgeon gets too curious. Within days, wounds begin to fester. Nurses debate whether to apply a poultice or just pray. The hospital cat is probably your best chance at reliable company. Victorian medicine treats infection with all the scientific rigor of a game of whack-a-mole. Nobody knows exactly why wounds go bad so quickly, but everyone's got a theory. Bad air? Unlucky stars? Or maybe just a lack of proper respect for the Queen. As the days drag on after surgery, you find yourself inspecting your bandages the way a gambler checks his dice. Nervous, hopeful, and slightly suspicious of cheating. The warning signs are all too familiar. Redness, swelling, a heat that feels like you're secretly baking a potato beneath your linens. If you're unlucky, a rainbow of fluids appears, each more alarming than the last. Nurses poke at your wound, frown thoughtfully, and whisper among themselves. Could be miasma, says one. Could be humours, offers another. A third simply sighs and starts boiling more water, as if sheer enthusiasm might chase away the infection. Treatments are a roulette wheel of creativity. There's the classic poultice, a lump of herbs, bread, or, in one memorable case, mashed turnip, all wrapped in a rag and applied directly to the wound. Sometimes it's warm, sometimes it's cold, but it always smells like something you'd rather not eat. If you're particularly unlucky, someone will suggest leeches. Because if your body's already losing blood, why not speed up the process? There's also the ever-popular let's see what happens if we just leave it alone. Victorian faith in the body's ability to heal itself is rivaled only by its willingness to be amazed when it doesn't. Patients swap horror stories. Mine turned green, but I kept it, boasts one. Mine started to whistle, confides another. There's a certain pride in surviving the worst that bacteria, ignorance, and sheer bad luck can throw at you. Doctors, meanwhile, sweep in for their daily rounds. Noses lifted, as if refusing to acknowledge the reality of pus. They prod, they mutter, they occasionally recommend a change of scenery. Fresh air cures everything. And then they leave, their coats gathering new stains as they go. The more infections a doctor's coat can boast, the more experience he claims, never mind that half of it came from the same patient. The nurses, on the other hand, do what they can. They swap bandages, offer encouragement, and sometimes slip you a sip of brandy when no one is looking. If you start to shiver, they bundle you up. If you spike a fever, they fan your face and hope you don't become tonight's cautionary tale. You learn to trust their judgment more than any surgeon's. At least they admit when they don't know what to do. All the while, the hospital cat weaves between the beds, unimpressed by human suffering. He's seen it all before. He ignores the groans, dodges the nurses, and occasionally curls up at your feet, a purring reminder that life goes on, even if it's mostly chasing mice and avoiding leaky chamber pots. Sometimes, though, infection wins. The fever burns too high, the swelling grows too fierce, and the hospital priest is called in for a final blessing. The ward grows quiet, the laughter dims, and for a moment everyone remembers just how thin the line is between gallows humor and actual gallows. But just as often, you pull through, scarring over, limping forward, and swearing never to look at mashed turnips the same way again. You share your survival story, exaggerate the details for dramatic effect, and become a minor celebrity among the walking wounded. In the world of Victorian surgery, infection is less a plot twist and more a recurring character, never quite welcome, but always expected. And if you manage to outlast it, you've earned the right to complain about hospital food for years to come. Nurses are often overworked, undertrained, and occasionally terrifying. Florence Nightingale is still a few years away from inventing professional compassion. Victorian hospital nursing is less angel of mercy and more fierce sergeant major with a mop and a grudge. The ward is ruled by a handful of women and a few unlucky men, armed with aprons, opinions, and the uncanny ability to detect a hidden flask at 50 paces. Some are born to the calling, their hearts as big as their voices. Others have simply failed at every other job and now find themselves dispensing gruel, gossip, and the occasional slap on the wrist. Training is mostly by osmosis or from whatever the previous nurse yelled at you before storming off to quit. Official instruction consists of don't let anyone die if you can help it, and the sharp end goes in first. You quickly learn to tell the difference between a competent nurse and a dangerous one. The good ones can change a bandage with their eyes closed, dose out laudanum like a mixologist, and threaten a rowdy patient into submission using nothing but a withering glare. The rest, well, they're best avoided at pill time. Shift changes are legendary for their chaos. Information about patients is shouted across the ward, usually over the wails of someone discovering that, yes, the soup is the same as yesterday. Keep an eye on the one with the green leg. That lad's due for a poultice. If anyone tries to escape, send them to Sister Agnes. She's got the strong grip. The new arrivals march in, size up the crowd, and make mental notes about who is most likely to require mopping up before supper. The day-to-day reality is relentless. Nurses rise before dawn to stoke fires, haul water, and attempt to beat the previous day's stains out of the linens. Some are genuinely nurturing, doling out pats on the hand, a gentle word, or an extra blanket. Others view kindness as a sign of weakness and prefer the tough love approach. If you're well enough to complain, you're well enough to walk to the privy. There are rumours that Sister Margaret once performed a field amputation using nothing but a butter knife and sheer determination. No one wants to test her patience. Resources are thin. The medicine cupboard is always empty, the clean bandage pile suspiciously damp, and every bottle of spirits must be guarded from accidental evaporation. If you need something, a new pillow, a word of comfort, a weapon against the rats, you plead your case to the nurse in charge. Results may vary. Still, for all their quirks, the nurses are the backbone of the hospital. When the surgeon sweeps out, his work done, it's the nurse who sits with you through the fever, who brings cold tea at midnight, who shoos away the cat from your fresh dressing and shoos away the priest when he arrives too early for comfort. The good ones have mastered the art of soothing without promising too much. You'll live, they say, unless you don't. It's strangely reassuring. Of course, there are the nightmares. The nurse with a tendency to mix up potions, the one who snores through the night shift, the one who thinks every malady can be cured by a brisk walk and a stern talking to. You do your best to stay on their good side. An extra thank you, a compliment on their hat, or, when desperate, a bribe of pilfered jam can go a long way. Florence Nightingale, that paragon of lamp-lit mercy, is only just preparing her notebooks. In the meantime, your fate rests in the hands of a staff equal parts, fearsome and fiercely protective. They are the angels and demons of Victorian aftercare. Your greatest hope, your greatest worry, and the only ones who know where the good pillows are hidden. In the end, you come to realize that while the surgeon may save your life, it's the nurses who make it bearable, one sarcastic, sleep-deprived, iron-willed miracle at a time. Children face the same horrors as adults, but with fewer coping mechanisms. Lollipops are replaced by stern lectures about the value of not crying. If you think it's tough being an adult in a Victorian hospital, try being 4 feet tall and terrified. The world is already a confusing, hazardous place when you're a child in the 1840s. Add in fever, a suspicious rash, and a nurse who thinks emotional comfort is a waste of everyone's time. And you have the recipe for a truly unforgettable formative experience. From the moment they're wheeled in, wide-eyed, clinging to a battered rag doll or the sleeve of a harried parent, children are expected to be miniature stoics. Tears are discouraged. Complaints are met with stories of little Billy, who lost both legs and didn't utter a peep. Instead of stickers or sweets, there are promises of extra gruel or a pat on the head. The reward system is best described as Victorian minimalist. The pediatric section of the ward is nothing more than a few small cots squeezed between adults. Privacy doesn't exist, and neither does special treatment, unless you count being the only one short enough to fit comfortably under your own blanket. If you're lucky, the nurse might bring you a toy, a carved wooden horse, a faded deck of cards, or a button that used to belong to someone more fortunate. Mostly, though, you get hand-me-down sympathy and a share in the general gloom. For operations, the routine is much the same as for adults. A swig of something bitter, sometimes actual medicine, sometimes just to shut you up, a leather strap to bite, and a team of large, intimidating grown-ups holding you down. If you're really unfortunate, the surgeon will try to put you at ease by reminding you that most children survive this sort of thing. You don't know what sort of thing means, but you're pretty sure it involves the scary tray of tools on the bedside table. Pain relief is rare, and, for children, mostly theoretical. Laudanum is reserved for the truly inconsolable, and morphine is more likely to be offered to the parents, for the nerves. Instead, you get gentle encouragement to be brave for your mother, or, if you're an orphan, for the Queen. A nurse might press a cold cloth to your brow and tell you to count backward from 10, a cruel joke, given that the only numbers you really know are 1, now, and 2, please stop. The emotional support network is a mixed bag. Some of the adult patients go out of their way to distract the young ones, telling stories, making shadow puppets on the wall, or teaching them the fine art of hospital bed complaining. Others just grumble about the noise. Fellow child patients, meanwhile, form an instant, if fleeting, fraternity of the afflicted. Alliances are forged over shared gruel, whispered secrets, and the universal hope that today won't be the day their wound starts smelling funny. Occasionally, a visitor brings in a real treat, a hard sweet, a bit of honeycomb, or even a peeled orange. These are treasures, divided with solemn ceremony and guarded from the older boys who might try to snatch them. For most, the true prize is a kind word or a promise of a story after lights out. Recovery is slow and uncertain. Some children bounce back, fueled by a stubborn refusal to stay in bed. Others struggle, their energy sapped by infection, pain, or the simple homesickness that hangs in the air like another hospital odor. But all of them learn fast how to dodge the crankiest nurse, how to feign sleep at the right moment, and how to face the next day with more courage than most adults muster. By the time they're discharged, these children are forever changed. Some leave with a limp, others with a scar, all with stories that will last a lifetime. In Victorian hospitals, childhood isn't lost. It's just put through a crucible, and whatever comes out is a little older, a little wiser, and, for better or worse, a whole lot braver. From wounded soldiers to royalty, no one is safe from the Victorian blade. Sometimes the stories make the papers, sometimes they just make nightmares. Victorian medicine, for all its rough edges and rustic charm, was an equal opportunity terror. The rich, the powerful, and the well-born wound up on the operating table just as surely as chimney sweeps and ragpickers. The difference? When a high-profile patient went under the knife, the world watched, and so did the press. For surgeons, it was a chance to make history. For patients, it was a chance to become a cautionary tale, or at least a dinner party anecdote. Take the case of Lord Percival, a dashing aristocrat with a penchant for horseback accidents. When he broke his leg in 3 places during a fox hunt, the local surgeon was summoned with all the urgency of a royal wedding. The entire countryside tuned in for updates. Lord's leg in jeopardy. The papers screamed. The surgeon, keenly aware that failure might mean more than a bad review, gathered every available student and made the operation into a grand spectacle. In the end, the Lord lost his leg, but gained a permanent place in surgical folklore, not to mention a hand-carved wooden limb in the shape of a fox's head. Then there were the military heroes, fresh from the Empire's latest misadventures. Major Bannister, survivor of the Crimean campaign, arrived with a festering arm wound and a medal pinned to his chest. The operation was front-page news. Hero faces the knife. Can Bannister beat the odds? The surgeon, hungry for acclaim, set out to break the hospital speed record. The operation was successful mostly. Bannister kept his arm, though it was never quite straight again. The surgeon kept his record, and the medical students kept a vivid story to terrify future generations. Even the royal family was not immune. Queen Victoria herself narrowly avoided an encounter with the Victorian blade, thanks in part to her lifelong obsession with wellness regimes. But her cousin, the unfortunate Prince Leopold, suffered from haemophilia and made more than one visit to the operating table. His doctors debated the merits of every new procedure, while the tabloids debated whether he'd live to see his next birthday. Every cut was a national event. Every drop of royal blood was mourned by the empire. For surgeons, celebrity cases were double-edged swords. Public triumphs if all went well. Public scandal if things went sideways. There's the infamous tale of a certain Dr. Jameson, who operated on a visiting Russian nobleman in front of half the medical college and managed to remove the wrong organ entirely. The newspapers called it the Great Kidney Mystery. The Russian ambassador called it something unprintable. Dr. Jameson retreated to Scotland and, rumour has it, took up gardening. Some stories never made the papers but lived on in whispers. The society widow who survived 3 amputations and went on to host the best parties in London, her guests, always seated in a triangle so she could show off her wooden leg. The notorious gangster who insisted on being awake for his surgery, threatening to haunt the hospital if anything went wrong. The nurses swore they heard his voice for years. The young actress who, after a botched operation, returned to the stage and milked her new limp for every ounce of sympathy and applause. But perhaps the most famous cases are those where the outcome is so miraculous or so disastrous that they become legend. A leg reattached, sort of, a patient who walked out hours after being declared dead, or a surgeon who managed to operate on himself just to prove a point. In the world of Victorian surgery, fame was a double-edged scalpel. Survive, and you were a miracle. Fail, and you were a headline. For the rest of us, it's a reminder that even celebrity is no protection from the unpredictable theatre of history's most infamous operating rooms. A deep dive into the implements of pain, saws, scalpels, forceps, and things that look suspiciously like gardening tools. Rust is optional but not uncommon. Victorian surgery is where medicine and carpentry meet for an ill-advised tea party. The surgeon's tray is a museum of nightmares, its contents laid out for all to see: gleaming steel, chipped bone, and an assortment of instruments that wouldn't look out of place in your grandfather's shed. You're pretty sure you've seen at least one of these tools used to mend a fence. Let's start with the bone saw, the undisputed superstar of the operating theatre. This isn't your delicate, precision-engineered device of today. No. The Victorian saw is a heavy, toothed beast that would make a lumberjack blush. The blade is broad, the handle is wooden, and the overall vibe is, let's just get this over with. It's rarely cleaned, never sharpened, and sometimes still has a splinter of last week's patient wedged between its teeth. The surgeon swings it like a maestro, if the orchestra consisted entirely of screaming patients. Next up, the scalpel. It aspires to delicacy, with its slim handle and sharp edge, but decades of hard use have left it looking a little battered. The blade is replaced only when it can no longer slice through a loaf of hospital bread, which, as you've learned, is a high bar. If you're lucky, your surgeon has more than one, though he'll probably drop the cleanest one on the floor and shrug as he wipes it off on his apron. Forceps come in a bewildering array of shapes and sizes. There are forceps for gripping arteries, for pulling out bits of bone, for extracting mysterious foreign objects. One pair is curved like a bird's beak, another straight and pointy, all of them cold and slightly sticky to the touch. Nobody is quite sure why. Some believe the tackiness improves grip. Others believe it's just the cumulative effect of centuries of reusable medicine. Then we have the chisels and gouges, tools that, in a more peaceful world, would be used to carve Sunday roasts or build rocking chairs. In the Victorian hospital, they're put to use splitting bone, scraping away infection, and generally making everyone in the gallery feel a bit queasy. The surgeon wields them with gusto, hammering and prying as if he's up against a particularly stubborn wardrobe. Speaking of hammers, yes, there's a hammer. It's heavy, dented, and almost always sticky. Why? Best not to ask. The surgeon claims it's from the bandages. You suspect otherwise. Among the more mysterious tools is the trephine, a circular blade used for drilling into skulls, a crowd pleaser for the students, a nightmare for the patient. The crank and winch apparatus, which resembles something from a medieval dungeon, is reserved for particularly advanced cases. If your surgeon reaches for it, start praying. Sutures are made from gut, actual animal intestine, painstakingly twisted into strings and stored in glass jars on the windowsill. Needles are thick and rarely sharp, and the act of stitching a wound is part medical procedure, part wrestling match. Not to be forgotten, the clamps and retractors. These are metal contraptions that keep wounds open for better visibility, as if anyone in the room wants to see more. They squeak, they slip, and sometimes they snap shut unexpectedly, prompting colorful language from the surgeon and fresh panic in the patient. All of this is finished off with a wipe on the ever-present apron or a dunk in the nearest basin of questionably clean water. Sterility is an idea whose time has not yet come. Rust adds character. By the end, you realize that Victorian surgical instruments are less precision tools and more whatever gets the job done before the patient bolts. The next time you pass a hardware store, spare a thought for your ancestors and hope your surgeon never asks you to hold the hammer. Just as you think hope is lost, a mustachioed savior introduces carbolic acid. Too bad it's not mainstream yet. Otherwise, you'd have a fighting chance. By the late 1860s, change is in the air, literally. Enter Joseph Lister, a surgeon with a face made for etching into history books and a mind full of revolutionary ideas. Lister, unlike his peers, is obsessed with the invisible world. While most surgeons still believe infection is caused by bad air, evil spirits, or perhaps an insufficiently impressive mustache, Lister starts to wonder if there might be something else at work. Something small, something germy. He reads the work of Louis Pasteur, that French genius who discovered that tiny things, microbes, cause wine to go sour, milk to curdle, and, just maybe, surgical wounds to fester and kill. Instead of scoffing, Lister gets excited. He orders barrels of carbolic acid, a substance used to clean sewers, always a reassuring start, and starts experimenting on his unfortunate Glasgow patients. Lister's big idea is simple. Soak the wound, the dressings, and, ideally, the surgeon in carbolic acid before, during, and after surgery. Sure, it burns. Sure, it stinks. But for the first time, wounds that would have been a one-way ticket to the grave actually heal. The staff mutter about witchcraft. The students marvel. The senior surgeons roll their eyes and keep wiping their hands on their aprons. The patients are skeptical. The smell alone is enough to wake the unconscious. But the statistics don't lie. Fewer deaths, fewer festering limbs, fewer nights spent listening to the priest mumble last rites. Lister becomes a quiet hero. He doesn't grandstand. He's too busy disinfecting his shoes. His most famous case, a boy with a compound fracture who, thanks to Lister's regime, keeps his leg and his life. The news spreads faster than infection ever could. Still, progress is slow. Across Britain, many surgeons resist the carbolic fad. Why bother with extra work when you can blame infection on the weather? The traditionalists mock Lister for dousing his tools in acid. He'll pickle the patients, they scoff, while patients, meanwhile, continue to drop like flies everywhere else. For most hospital wards, your timing is tragic. The man in the bed next to you didn't make it. The nurse shrugs and blames ill humor. Your surgeon still prefers a dirty sore, a brisk hand wash in whiskey, and a positive attitude. By the time word of Lister's success reaches your hospital, you've already been wrapped, bandaged, and hopefully not buried. But Lister's persistence pays off. Younger surgeons, impressed by the survival rates, begin to copy his methods. Carbolic spray machines start to appear in the trendier operating theatres, filling the room with a fog that's part disinfectant, part dramatic flair. Surgical instruments get their first real baths. Aprons are, very occasionally, washed on purpose. The death rate drops, and suddenly, the new fashion in medicine is not killing your patient. The change isn't just medical, it's cultural. Hygiene becomes all the rage. Nurses develop routines for cleaning, wards are aired out, and even the hospital cat is occasionally shampooed. Modern surgery, at last, has a fighting chance. Of course, for you, lying in your bed in the age before antiseptics, wondering why your wound is humming God Save the Queen. All this progress is tantalizingly out of reach, but your suffering isn't for nothing. It's the fuel for the next generation of medicine, a testament to the power of curiosity, and a reminder that sometimes salvation arrives with a cloud of stinging vapor and an unwavering belief in invisible armies. So the next time you reach for hand sanitizer, thank Joseph Lister and all the brave souls who, a little too early, missed out on his miracle. Because nothing says historical progress like finally figuring out that scrubbing up before slicing open strangers might just save a few lives. If you survive, you're sent home with a limp, a story, and an entirely new appreciation for modern painkillers and insurance. Congratulations! You've lived to tell the tale and possibly start a new career as a cautionary bedtime story. The journey home begins with fanfare, or at least a mumbled farewell, and a sympathetic handshake from the nurse who secretly bet against you. The hospital sends you off with the same bundle you arrived with, minus a limb or two, and plus a mountain of colourful scars. If you're lucky, someone lends you a crutch that's only moderately splintery. If you're very lucky, the hospital cat escorts you to the door, purring with what could generously be called encouragement. Outside, the world is shockingly bright, noisy, and indifferent. Gone are the groans and grotty linens of the ward. Now you face the uneven pavements of Victorian London. Crossing the street is an adventure, one that requires more courage and spatial awareness than the surgery itself. Cobblestones rattle under your new peg leg or tender feet. Passing carriages splash you with mystery water, which you hope is only rain. You clutch your meager possessions and try not to think about all the microbes no one can see. The first stop is often the local apothecary, whose shelves are lined with jars of powders, vials of tonics, and remedies featuring instructions like take with food, or whiskey, or both. Some of these mixtures might help dull the pain or clear an infection, but most taste like burnt licorice mixed with despair. You buy them anyway, because hope, like laudanum, is a powerful drug. At home, your new reality sets in. There are no follow-up appointments, no gentle phone calls from a concerned nurse, and certainly no pamphlets on how to care for your wound in 3 easy steps. Instead, there are neighbors who stare, family members who fuss, and friends who want all the gory details over tea. You become a minor celebrity on your street, and your story grows with every retelling. By the 3rd week, your routine surgery now involves 6 surgeons, a lightning storm, and a duel between a nurse and the hospital cat. Adapting isn't easy. Daily chores turn into athletic events, hauling water, chopping wood, or wrestling with an uncooperative boot. If you have a wooden leg, you learn the delicate art of not getting stuck in mud. If you've got a new scar, it becomes your conversation starter at every gathering. Let me tell you about the time I survived hospital soup and surgery. You develop a whole new set of priorities, like avoiding stairs, running children, and anyone wielding a medical bag. There are unexpected perks. Suddenly, you're exempt from some of the less desirable tasks. Can't possibly milk the cow, with this wound. People are a bit kinder for at least a week, and your newfound status as a survivor means the village busybodies seek your advice on everything from corns to marriage proposals. You might even inspire the local children to play hospital, which mostly involves running around with broom handles and yelling, "Hold him down!" Not all days are good. Some are spent in pain or frustration, missing the routine, and even the chaos of the hospital. You find yourself longing for a proper cup of tea, not the stuff boiled with worry at home. But slowly the aches dull, your energy returns, and the nightmares fade, except the one about the sticky hammer, which haunts you forever. Most of all, you're left with perspective. Suddenly, a stubbed toe or a headache is laughably manageable. You appreciate soft beds, quiet nights, and the blessed absence of sawdust in your socks. You become living proof that, against all odds, people survive, and sometimes thrive, after Victorian surgery. So you limp, or shuffle, or swagger into your new life. Forever changed, but alive. And if you ever forget how lucky you are, just take a deep breath, count your scars, and whisper a quiet thank you that you're not due back at the hospital for at least another century. Before the main event, there's a rigorous checklist. Are you breathing? Do you have a pulse? Can you sign your name, or at least make a convincing X on a piece of paper? The Victorian consent form is mostly just a nod and a wince. The nurse checks your heartbeat with a pocket watch, glances at your pallor, and shrugs. That's it. You're cleared for surgery, unless you faint first, which, honestly, is considered a head start on anesthesia. Preparation for surgery in a Victorian hospital is less a science and more a fever dream of improvised rituals. While you might expect a thorough medical evaluation, what you actually receive is a brisk once-over, performed by a nurse who's already halfway through her third cup of tea, possibly gin. She places a cold hand on your forehead, squints at your fingernails, and asks if you've eaten breakfast. If you answer yes, she'll sigh and remind you that you'll probably see it again shortly. Vital signs are measured with creative enthusiasm. There's no thermometer, so the nurse presses her palm against your cheek and declares you just warm enough to operate. The surgeon, meanwhile, appears briefly to poke your abdomen, listen to your chest with a stethoscope that may or may not actually work, and murmur, "You'll do." If you cough, you're told to keep that down until after. If you sneeze, the nearby students back away. Nobody wants to add plague to the day's procedure list. There's paperwork to consider. But Victorian bureaucracy is delightfully minimalist. The consent form is a scrap of parchment with a splash of ink and a blank space. Can you sign your name? No? An X will do. Can't manage an X? Not to worry. The nurse will sign for you and then ask if you want your effects sent to anyone in particular. For the more dramatic, a whispered last will can be added to the margins. If you're still conscious and willing, you're officially ready. Family and friends, if present, are given a quick rundown. We'll do our best. Pray for a speedy result. Tears are gently ignored, as emotions are believed to worsen the air. If you're alone, the hospital cat might drop by to knead your blanket and cast a professional eye over your prospects. Personal effects are collected and stored in a locked cupboard, supposedly safe, though everyone knows old Tommy once got a new walking stick and a gold ring by accident after surgery. If you have any valuables, you're advised to hide them in your sock or perhaps donate them to the local priest just in case. Then come the physical preparations. Shoes off, gown on, if they bother, and a polite request to think happy thoughts. If your hair is long, it's tied back with whatever's handy, twine, ribbon, the occasional bootlace. If you have facial hair, it stays. Surgeons secretly compete over who can remove a limb without nicking a single whisker. You're offered a final swig of brandy or a bite of stale biscuit. which doubles as both sustenance and a distraction from the growing chorus of surgical instruments being sharpened. The nurse gathers the support team, 3 burly men whose job is to hold you down, plus an optimistic student with a clipboard. The surgeon checks his watch and jokes that time is of the essence. You chuckle, but it's the kind of laugh you hear at funerals. As the orderly wheels you toward the theater, you're reminded once more, are you breathing? Yes. Do you have a pulse? For now, have you signed your X? Good enough. You're as prepared as any Victorian patient can hope to be. In a world before pre-op blood tests, advanced scans, or even consistent hand washing, readiness is measured not by science, but by spirit. You take a deep breath, square your shoulders, and hope your fainting spell arrives before the saw does. Welcome to the checklist. In Victorian surgery, that's all you get, and sometimes it's all you need. You're ushered onto a wooden table so narrow it feels like you're balancing on a bookshelf. There's no pillow, just a bundle of old towels that smell faintly of regret. The surface is so hard you briefly consider whether being knocked unconscious by discomfort might be your best-case scenario. The only padding is your own sense of denial. Victorian hospitals are not known for their luxury accommodations. The operating table, grandly referred to as a surgical platform by optimistic pamphlets, is little more than a glorified plank, suspiciously sticky and probably scavenged from a shipwreck. If it rocks slightly as you sit, that's just part of the charm. Your feet dangle, your spine protests. The nurse apologizes for the firmness, and you wonder how much worse the soft table must have been. Gone are the dreams of feather mattresses and fluffy linens. Instead, you're draped in a sheet so thin you can read last week's newsprint through it. The towels under your head have seen better decades. Their fibers infused with a rich bouquet of hospital aromas. Carbolic acid, old soup, and a hint of formaldehyde. If you squint, you can almost see the ghosts of patients past, whispering advice on how best to position your elbows for minimum agony. The table is high, so the surgeon doesn't have to bend over, and you lie there feeling both exposed and uncomfortably prominent, like a display loaf in a bakery window. Every limb is carefully arranged for maximum accessibility and minimum comfort. If you're chilly, tough luck. The only blanket in sight is already being used to mop up the previous patient's exuberance. The nurse offers a strip of rag as a neck roll. It's too short to help, too rough to ignore, and smells like boiled cabbage. Staying still is your first challenge. The surface is slick, and every twitch threatens to send you sliding off entirely. The nurse urges you to lie back and relax, but you suspect that's just a test to see how many patients are limber enough to grab the table's edge before tumbling off. Those who fail the test are simply caught by the porters and deposited back with an extra warning to try harder. As you stare up at the peeling paint on the ceiling, you become acutely aware of every bump, ridge, and splinter digging into your back. Some patients have taken to naming the lumps, "That's a poker lot," and this one here is Lord Numbutt. Conversation in the ward is sprinkled with complaints about the board, and every survivor swaps stories about the time they nearly lost more than their dignity to a particularly enthusiastic knot in the wood. The table creaks under your weight, groaning in sympathy. Students lean in. The wood bows slightly, and you brace for impact, praying that the only thing falling apart will be your nerves, not the furniture. The surgeon occasionally uses the table as a percussion instrument, drumming his fingers while explaining the procedure for the assembled crowd. It's a beat that matches your rising heartbeat. No matter how bad it gets, the table is a democratic misery. Whether you're rich or poor, noble or commoner, your back aches just the same. A particularly unlucky patient might find a lost coin wedged in a crack. That's the closest thing to a treasure you're likely to discover in the Victorian surgical suite. As the surgery commences, The discomfort of the table is replaced by more pressing concerns, but its legacy lingers. For weeks afterward, you'll remember the exact shape of that one protruding nail, or the way the towels stuck to your skin like a second, more depressing set of pajamas. When all is said and done, you'll rise, if you can, shake off the splinters, and move on to the next ordeal. But you'll never forget the operating table, a Victorian marvel in discomfort, a true test of endurance, and possibly the hardest part of the whole procedure. In Victorian surgery, comfort is not included, but the stories are free. The surgery takes place in a room lit by whatever nature or the janitor provides. Sunlight streams through grimy panes, candles flicker ominously, and someone in the corner holds a lamp with hands so shaky you worry more about fire than infection. Shadows dance across your body like extra assistants, none of whom went to medical school. If you imagined your operation happening in a gleaming, well-lit theatre, think again. The Victorian operating theatre is a dramatic term for a glorified attic, where light is a precious, unpredictable commodity. If the weather is good, you're bathed in slanted daylight, filtered through windows more soot than glass. The rays catch every floating dust mote, making the air sparkle in a way that's oddly beautiful, until you remember those particles are probably half of someone's former wound dressing. On a cloudy day, it's a different story. The staff rely on an army of candles set at odd intervals, wax pillars with singed edges, guttering on saucers, and pooling wax in every crevice. The flames throw shadows that leap and stretch across the ceiling, giving the room an eerie, haunted vibe. It's less medical procedure, more amateur séance. Each time a nurse passes by, she sends a gust of air that threatens to snuff out the entire operation. Literally, if you're lucky, someone checks the candle supply before your turn. If not, you might just become a legend for being the one who survived a surgery in the dark. Sometimes you get a little of both, daylight on one side, candlelight on the other, and a patchwork of gloom everywhere else. Your body is half illuminated, half mysterious. As the surgeon squints to see where bone ends and shadow begins, the students huddle in, adjusting their notebooks to catch every sliver of light. Occasionally, an eager assistant holds up an oil lamp with trembling hands, aiming the glow in your general direction. This is both helpful and terrifying, as the lamp's glass wobbles with every exhale, and the scent of hot oil mixes with everything else in the room. The surgeon, ever the showman, adapts with gusto. He tilts your leg this way and that, searching for the best angle, grumbling about the lack of proper illumination. He once attended a demonstration in Paris, he says, where the French used mirrors to bounce sunlight directly onto the wound. It sounded elegant until someone set their patient's hair on fire. Now, he makes do with what's at hand, his hands casting strange silhouettes that sometimes look more like birds than anything remotely surgical. Every so often, a lighting emergency occurs. A candle gutters out, plunging half the room into darkness. The janitor rushes to relight it, leaving the surgeon to mutter darkly about primitive conditions and the glories of modern progress. If dusk falls mid-operation, the mood in the gallery turns anxious. Students elbow for better vantage points, nurses scramble for matches, and you try not to picture your own operation being completed by touch alone. On rare, memorable occasions, a thunderstorm rolls in, throwing everything into chaos. Lightning flickers through the window, followed by thunder that rattles the very table you're lying on. The surgery pauses, the staff cross themselves or knock on wood, and you wonder if the drama is for your benefit or the amusement of the students. For all its shortcomings, the lighting is democratic. Everyone is equally confused, equally anxious, and equally unsure of what exactly is going on in the shadows. Mistakes are blamed on poor visibility, successes celebrated with the same enthusiasm as finding an unbroken lamp wick. In the end, you realize your fate may hinge as much on the placement of a candle as on the skill of the man wielding the saw. So you lie there, caught between the flicker of flame and the hope of a new dawn, trusting that, by luck or by lamplight, you'll make it through with only the usual amount of Victorian drama. In this operating theatre, lighting is never guaranteed, but the suspense is always included. A dozen nervous students crowd in for a better view. Some look green, some look way too excited. One of them drops a notebook on your foot, apologizes, and then faints before the first incision. Their job is to learn, but their main contribution is ramping up your sense of dread. Later, they'll compare notes and argue over who saw the most blood. Victorian hospitals are less sanctuaries of healing and more live classrooms with a very high dropout rate. Medical students are everywhere, leaning in, lurking in corners, clutching battered textbooks, and sporting expressions that swing between morbid curiosity and existential panic. Their presence is a constant reminder that your misery is, at best, a valuable educational tool and, at worst, a hilarious cautionary tale. The students jostle for position at your bedside, forming an uneven wall of faces. Some whisper anatomical terms they barely remember, hoping to impress their peers. Others just gape, wide-eyed, praying that no one asks them to hold anything slippery. A few scribble furiously in their notebooks, inventing medical terminology on the fly. Excessive exsanguination, patient somewhat unamused. One especially keen student attempts to sketch the proceedings, but manages only a series of wobbly lines that could be either your femur or the operating table's fourth leg. It's an atmosphere that manages to be both festive and funereal. For every groan or whimper you make, a student nearby takes it as a sign to write more furiously. For every shriek or spurt of blood, there's a gasp, a dropped pen, or, on a really dramatic day, a fainting spell. This is considered normal. In fact, it's almost a rite of passage. One veteran nurse claims she can predict which student will faint first based on the cut of their waistcoat. The surgeon, ever the showman, plays to his audience. He narrates every step, sometimes using you as an impromptu anatomy lesson. Observe, gentlemen, the patient's remarkable resistance to pain. Or is it just shock? He cracks jokes, "Don't lose your head unless we're operating on it," prompting nervous laughter from the gallery and a cold sweat from you. At times, he'll ask a student to assist. "Hold this limb, Mr. Barker." Mr. Barker, predictably, turns pale and nearly joins the pile of used rags on the floor. Medical students are a mixed blessing. Their main job is to learn, but their actual skill set is more varied. Some are remarkably helpful, steadying the surgeon's hand or passing instruments with practiced care. Others are better at causing problems, knocking over trays, tripping over their own feet, or nearly setting their notes on fire with a poorly placed candle. The bravest will attempt to answer the surgeon's questions, but more often than not, the conversation devolves into heated debate. "No, that's the femoral artery. Are you sure? It looks more like the tibial vein to me." Meanwhile, you wish they'd settle the matter somewhere outside your personal space. After the surgery, the students retreat to the corner to debrief. They compare notes, tally up the number of faintings, theirs and yours, and try to one-up each other with tales of the day's most astonishing gush. Some will go home inspired, others slightly traumatized, and all a little more aware of just how complicated and terrifying the human body can be. For you, their presence is equal parts comfort and comedy. On one hand, you're never alone. On the other, you're never alone. There's always someone ready to watch you be brave, or embarrassed, or unconscious. Your ordeal will be immortalized in dozens of medical notebooks, half-remembered lectures, and the occasional dinner party anecdote. In Victorian hospitals, medical students are the world's most awkward cheer squad, clapping, gasping, and sometimes collapsing at the sidelines. You can only hope they're paying enough attention that someday someone else's surgery will be just a little less dramatic thanks to what they learned from you. And so, as the candles flicker low and the last imaginary surgeon wipes his hands on a blood-stained apron, it's time to drift away from the world of Victorian medicine, a place where your odds of survival depended mostly on luck, speed, and whether your doctor thought germs were just an urban legend. Tonight, you've survived the hustle and horror of the 19th century hospital ward. You've faced sores sharper than your neighbors' opinions, audience members more invested in your surgery than your own family, and nurses who offered more laudanum than sympathy. You've learned that a clean surgical apron was just one with enough layers of blood to be considered historical, and that hospital food could, in fact, lower your will to live. If you made it home at all, you did so with a limp, a wild story, and a new appreciation for the miracle that is modern health insurance. But there's something quietly heroic about every Victorian patient. Those who endured pain unimaginable to us, who trusted their lives to men with mutton chops and questionable hygiene, who survived or succumbed with the same stubborn hope that tomorrow might be a little less awful. Their resilience, grim, stubborn, sometimes hilarious, carried humanity forward, one awkward operation at a time. So tonight, as you settle under soft sheets in a clean bed, with not a single bone sore or medical student in sight, maybe send a silent thank you to the people of the past. For every antiseptic bottle, every painless surgery, every blessedly boring checkup, we owe a debt to those who suffered and survived before us. Because history isn't just a series of horrors. It's a living monument to the strength, the comedy, and the occasionally ridiculous hope of the human spirit. If they could laugh in the face of bloodletting and bite the bullet, sometimes literally, so can we, at least long enough to drift off to sleep. Good night, rest easy, and remember, whatever your problems are, at least you're not in a Victorian operating theatre with a carpenter's saw and a cheering crowd.